Welcome to the 2014 application period, frequently asked questions and last-minute questions and answers. We have several folks with us this morning, each from the different regions, and I'm going to go ahead and get started here. First, I'd like to give you a quick introduction to some of the tools that you may need to use this morning. If you are coming in via teleconference, we ask that you select the telephone icon. If you're using a headset and microphone, we ask that you run your audio setup wizard using the microphone that looks like it has a little red star wheel on it. When you go to exit the session today, we ask that you select File. There'll be a drop-down menu and then select Exit. You'll see whiteboard tools, however, we're not going to use those today. What we will use, though, is the chat box for you to send and ask questions. Additionally, you may want to raise your hand to ask a specific question. Maybe we missed something in the chat box as it scrolled by quickly or something. So this is another way that you can get our attention. You can just raise your hand using this button. So we do have the teleconference line available today, and that is 1-800-662-6992. Anthony will probably put that in the chat box. And the access code is 1023205, and you'll need to press the pound button. The Alaska Region TTA Center is hosting this webinar today. Our staff is our Regional Director, Anthony Kaoli, myself, the Training and Technical Assistance Manager, Angela Camus, and our Technology and E-Outreach Manager, Charles Peel. We also have a pool of consultants with various areas of expertise. Each of the TTA centers provides free training for project planning and development, pre-application and post-award, as well as free technical assistance for project planning and development, on-site, unfunded, grantee, and probably what is very important to you at this point in time, pre-application electronic technical assistance. And once your application is about 75% complete, contact your TTA center and ask them to review it prior to your submission. It's a great idea and it's a great tool, and ANA offers this resource to you free. You can find information on our website at www.analaska.org. Oh, and by the way, you'll want to contact your own individual region, and we have that information at the end of today on how to contact them. The Alaska region also offers Google Plus communities for collaborating and sharing resources together. And then you can also connect with resources at the National ANA website, www.acf.hhs.gov/ANA. Many resources, upcoming events, great resource and website. So ANA promotes self-sufficiency for Native Americans by providing discretionary grant funding for community-based projects, as well as training and technical assistance, as I mentioned a little earlier, to eligible tribes and Native organizations. ANA's vision is that Native communities are thriving. I wanted to point out that there is a webinar scheduled for next week. There is numerous webinars, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware. Next week's webinar was the Native Language Tipping Point, going from endangered to thriving. This is hosted by the Eastern region. and their registration link is available on their website. Again, we'll have that information at the end. For today, we have a couple of goals for the webinar. We want to make sure that you get to hear the answers to lots of the frequently asked questions that are coming into the various training and technical assistance centers throughout each region. They apply to everyone. And we wanted to give an opportunity to ask those last-minute questions that you may have and have a host of valuable resources from each TTA center available to answer those for you. So the first set of questions is going to be answered through the Eastern region, and today we have Rondell Clay for that. She is the Regional Director. The second set will be answered through the Western region, and the Technical Assistance Manager is doing those, and that is Dan Van Otten. The next set will be answered through the Alaska region, and I will answer those set of questions, and then the last set of questions will be answered by the Pacific region, and that will be Napua Harbottle, their training manager. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and Rondell, you're up.
Hi there, everyone. One question that we have been getting probably more than any other this application season are from applicants asking us to review their objectives and tell us if they are SMART. SMART being the acronym that ANA uses: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's important to assure that your objectives are SMART. It is one of the evaluation questions that reviewers are going to use when they're evaluating your application. The FOA clearly outlines what ANA means by SMART. Specific in identifying the outcomes that will be achieved. Measurable, using quantifiable or objective terms to describe how progress and completion will be measured. Achievable, given the proposed time frame, approach, and resources. Relevant to the problem statement, project goal, and the long-term goals of the community to be served. And time-bound, with an end date reflecting completion within the project period. Since this information isn't right in front of you, you can find that explanation in the FOA. For those of you writing for SEDS or SEDS, it's on page 19. For those of you writing for language or Esther Martinez, it's on page 18 in that FOA, or those FOAs. And for those of you writing for environmental, the question is on page 17. Next slide. Okay. Another question we tend to get a lot. How many awards can a tribe or organization have per catalog of federal domestic assistance number? And that answer is 1. You can only have 1 award per CFDA number under each of the 3 CFDA numbers that ANA has. So therefore, under 93.612, you can only have 1 grant, either a SEDS, a SEDS, or a NABI. Under 93.587, you can only have 1 grant, a language preservation and maintenance, or a language preservation and maintenance Esther Martinez immersion grant. One or the other. The maximum number of grants a tribe, moving on to the next question, the maximum number of grants a tribal organization can have running concurrently is 3. 1 under 93.612, 1 under 93.587, and if your organization is eligible, because the eligibility criteria are a little bit different under the environmental grant, 93.581. Next. Now this was a stump the band question, and I had to do a little research for this one. Nobody had ever asked me this question before, and I've been doing this for almost 15 years. If you use footnotes, where do you place them? Because of course the FOA very clearly states that there is supposed to be a 1-inch margin around the page, top, bottom, and sides. So, but when you're using something like Word to type your narrative up in, the Word automatically defaults and puts footnotes in the footer. So, to answer the question, there's nothing in the guidance or the FOA that speaks on how footnotes are supposed to be handled within the document, with the exception of saying that they can be single-spaced and used. So, as long as you are not getting really close to your page limits, the 150-page limit for each application, I would just go ahead and let it be put into the regular Word format. Generally, Word is set up to put it, I think, a 1/2 inch above the bottom of the page as opposed to 1 inch at the bottom of the page. But if you are getting close as far as the number of pages in your application to that 150, then I would go in and change your settings on your footer so that your footer doesn't go below the 1-inch margin, because ANA has a formula. It clearly states in the FOA that there is a formula if you go over the page limit or if you don't follow the formatting requirements. Okie dokie. Next. Are there any rules about partnering with someone else on a grant and submitting one of our own under the same competition? That was another grant that I had never, or another question I had never been asked before. It is allowable. Certainly if the organizations are different applicants with different runs numbers and different EIN numbers and are eligible, they can both apply, and both or either one of them can partner on the other's application. It's when we get to, when ANA gets to the internal review part, if both applications happen to fall within the funding range, and ANA does an internal review of both those applications, that's when ANA will notice and take a very close look at the staffing plans, the partnerships, and linkages. ANA would then scrutinize the personnel and partnerships and associated agreements to assure the same people aren't working on both projects full-time, and that sort of thing, to make sure that the projects are not going to be taxed, meaning that you don't have people doing more than they could on either project, and to make sure that the projects are operating independently of one another. But keep in mind, the one thing that could impact this, if both do fall in the funding range, is ANA's geographical distribution of awards. ANA looks very carefully at geographical distribution when making funding decisions. And if they have too many grants in one particular area, they may not fund one or more of those grants. So, and that could be impacted under that if both partners are in the same region. Okay, hope that wasn't too confusing. Next. If you are applying for EMI, do you have to teach 500 hours all 3 years, or can you use the first year for material creation? The answer is, according to the FOA, language nests and language survival schools must provide 500 hours of language classes or instruction per year. If you can do that and still develop the curriculum, then you're fine. However, if not, you could think about going for an EMI as a language restoration, Native American language restoration program, which allows for the development of instructional materials and for teacher training, or you can just submit a regular language preservation and maintenance grant. It's really up to you as the applicant. Next. We are a Native program within a public school. Are we eligible to apply? More than likely, the applicant would be the public school and not the program within the school system. The program within the school doesn't necessarily qualify as a nonprofit and are not separately administered from the public school district. Therefore, unless the governing body of the public school district can meet the requirement for a majority of the board being represented by the community that is going to be served by the grant, they're probably not eligible. However, if the public schools governing board does have natives from the community that is going to be, a majority of natives from the community that is going to be served by the grant, then yes, they are eligible to apply. Next. Leveraged resources. This year, unlike previous years, ANA doesn't include any specific language telling you where to talk about leveraged resources or what you need to say about leveraged resources. In the past, ANA asked that you provide a target amount for the leveraged resources that are going to be gleaned during the project period. In the approach section of your project narrative, you are required to address things like organizational capacity, sustainability, and generally talk about enhancement of the project approach that you are going to be providing. That would be where you would talk about leveraged resources. You would talk about what kind of services or benefits they are bringing to the project. You are going to have to report on leveraged resources in your program reporting if you are funded. So I would talk about leveraged resources in relation to your organizational capacity, if that's one of the benefits you're going to get from leveraged resources. I would also talk about leveraged resources in relationship to sustainability, or how overall the leveraged resources are going to enhance your project. I would also give a target number, although it's not required. But like I said before, you're going to have to report on them if you're funded. Next. Okay, there we go. Project goal. This year, the FOA does not specifically tell you where to put the project goal. In the past, the project goal has been, the FOA has asked that you put the project goal under the outcomes expected section. You can either put it in the project abstract, the outcomes expected section where it was last year, or in the approach section, wherever it makes the application narrative flow the best. My suggestion to you, though, would be to bold the project goal so that it stands out and is easy for reviewers to find. And finally, down to my last one. Do I have to use the OWP form in the Grants.gov application, or can we submit the Word version of the OWP in our application? And will it count towards the 150-page limit? ANA would like you to use the form, but let's face it, there are issues with the form which do not allow you to easily insert new activities in between previously written ones. So basically what happens if you find out, your OWP is supposed to be the blueprint, and your activities are supposed to be in a chronological order, if possible, so that anyone who looks at your objective work plan will be able to implement the project and implement it the way it was originally intended. So, therefore, because you would practically have to write and rewrite using the form in Grants.gov, ANA is allowing you to use the Word version, to submit the Word version of the OWP in your application. The only way that you can do that without it counting towards the 150-page limit would be to use the Word version of the form that has the OMB approval number and validation date on it. As long as you use that version of the form that has up in the footer, OMB approved, and I believe there was a 2015 expiration date on there. Use that version, include it, upload it, and you're good. You won't have the OWP counted in your page limit. Okay, now that I totally confused everybody,
I appreciate all your answers.
Back to
and
Angela.
Next up, we have Dan Van Otten, the Technical Assistance Manager from the Western region. So we get his first question up here. And Dan, are you ready?
No, I'm not, but I'm going to go ahead anyhow. So a lot of the material that, or some of the material that Ron Bells just shared with you is material we're going to sort of tangentially be talking about in this series of questions as well. The first question has to do with cutting and pasting into Grants.gov uploads. And the dilemma that we've had is that there has been some inconsistency in whether or not cutting and pasting works. People have been unable to cut and paste from Word into the application itself on Grants.gov. It creates some kind of problem, and people want to know if that problem still exists. The answer to the question is yes, that problem still exists. The problem with cutting and pasting is still a present and current dilemma. So to be on the safe side, applicants should try and should type their text rather than cutting and pasting it. Grants.gov hasn't been able to deal with that problem. I think the same problem also exists with Grant Solutions. The system stems from a lack of compatibility between Microsoft and Adobe software. So to be safe, don't cut and paste. Type into the forms. And I want to thank Rondell for doing some research on that issue. She did some outreach with folks at Grants.gov, their program management office, and got that response for us. Is an evaluator required, as has been in the past? That requirement often was associated with the language programs, and evaluation, independent evaluation, third-party evaluation no longer is a requirement for ANA applications to plug into your proposal. Having said that, remember that evaluation is an important part of the proposal package, part of your narrative. And it's also part of the OWP. Evaluation of project results and project benefits is required. It doesn't take a third party to do it, but you are going to have to talk about the evaluation criteria you're going to use to evaluate results and benefits, and what the criteria for evaluation is.
Hi, Dan. There's a couple folks that are saying they can't hear you, so could you try to speak up just a little bit?
Sure. Is this better? Let me know.
Okay.
Do we want to go on to the next slide, or shall I repeat on this one?
That is better.
You want me to go on to the next? Okay. Okay, going on to the next slide. Okay, so when we're doing a multi-year work plan, do the objectives have to change from year to year, or is it just the activities that change? The specific content of project's objectives sort of depend on the structure of the project approach and the objective work plan. So that's what drives the form and the content of the objectives, your project approach and your OWP. So in an employment and training project, multi-year employment and training project, you could have an objective that deals with, for instance, the number of participants employed each year in the project. So in year one of the project, you may plan to have 28 community members employed. In year two of the project, 30 community members employed. In year three of the project, 35 community members employed. The project approach, the strategy that you're using to implement the project, drives the content of the objective. And in that example, you've got a similar objective that focuses on employment of individuals that is constant through the 3 years. We're pretending it's a 3-year project, 3 years of this project period. That's not always the case. Let's look at a language project. In a language project, you could have a 3-year project, and in the first year, you know, a lot of the focus is going to be on curriculum development. So the first year objectives could focus on curriculum development. The second year objectives could focus on teacher training and implementation of those developed curriculum. So the objective, the content of the objective shifts as the project moves through its strategy. It's the strategy that you've developed for the project's implementation. There's no rule that says that you have to have the same set of objectives year after year in a multi-year project. You can have, if that's the way the project is structured, or you can have objectives that change and build on each other sequentially as the project period moves forward. Okay, do we really have to have the application completed a week before the deadline? No, you don't. This is there's nothing that's prescribed that says that has to be done. That's just a suggestion that your TA providers generally are making, because one of the things we found is that Grants.gov gets kind of clogged the closer you get to the submittal deadline, and that folks that wait until you know, the submittal deadline is upon you to do their submission, their electronic submission to Grants.gov, quite often run into some difficulties. So our recommendation is that you allow yourself as much time for an electronic submittal as you would have used allow yourself for a paper submittal, and that's about a week. So time is a moving forward. You may not have that kind of time frame available for you at this point in time, but try and, for heaven's sakes, don't wait till the last minute. Try and get your electronic submittal in as early as you possibly can, just to avoid the probability or possibility of some sort of glitch in the transmittal. The difference between leveraged and resources and non-federal share. Leveraged resources, as Rondell said, no longer is a sort of breakout in the funding opportunity announcement. There's no the separate discussion of partnerships and leveraged resources as there has been in the past as impacts. But leveraged resources are a critical part of an application. Leveraged resources are those resources that are attracted to the project, that will be attracted to the project and strengthen the project scope, but they're not part of the project budget. They are not part of the project budget. Leveraged resources can be federal or non-federal. They can be cash or in kind. They're quite often one of the most valuable contributions that our partners in a project make. They provide us with leveraged resources that we can use for project implementation, project expansion, and project, as Rondell said, sustainability. So you're going to talk about leveraged resources in the approach section of your project. That's where you deal with leveraged resources, not in the budget section of the narrative. The non-federal share, of course, is the 20% of the total budget that is outside of, is not part of the request you're making to ANA for funding. It is part of the budget. You'll deal with it as in the budget line item and narrative development. Okay, next. Difference between a result and a benefit. Both are critical pieces of your project design, and a result is an output. It's an output, a measurable product of the project. Things like number of workshops held, things like number of participants involved. Those are measurable products of the project. They don't describe any change. They don't describe any beneficial change in the conditions that the project is supposed to be dealing with, the problem conditions. but they are created by the project's operation. Results and benefits, of course, are a large part of your presentation in the OWP. So when you're doing the OWP and you see results, think output. A benefit is an outcome, a measurable positive change created by the project. And so the benefits of the project will directly relate to and provide a statement that shows how the project will reduce or eliminate the problem that the project is designed to address. Okay? Benefits are measurable, positive changes that reduce or eliminate the problem the project is designed to address. That's the difference between those two critical components of the project. Partnerships include agreements with individuals. ANA used to have a definition for partnerships in the FOA. That's no longer the case. The answer is yeah, that partnerships can include agreements with individuals. Think about how you want to do that, though, because in some cases you may find that agreements with individuals may be better described as, you can also think of those folks as consultants in some cases. Consultants who are doing work as part of the non-federal share of the, contributing to the non-federal share of the application. So although you have the option of using individuals, defining individuals as partners, use the best definition that fits within the context of your project. And a partner, yeah, can be a subcontractor. In fact, in the FOA, there's a lot of either-or kinds of slash stuff, partner/subcontractor language. So the answer to that question is yes, a partner can also be a subcontractor. Next slide. How important is each of the funding opportunity announcements lists areas of interest that ANA wants us to take a close look at when we're focusing on project development. And those areas of interest are important, but it's much more important for a project to clearly show that it came out of a community-based planning process, that it responds to a problem identified by the community, and that it's designed to address that problem using a strategy that the community's helped to develop. That's much more important. That project description, the description of that kind of project, whatever that project is much more important than making sure that the project description falls within an area of interest that's published by ANA and the FOA. If it happens to be the case that the project designed by community-based planning falls within one of those interest areas, that's great. But in terms of really, what's the most critical issue? The most critical issue is that the project reflect community involvement, community direction.
Hi, here's that.
Okay. Do projects always need to be measurable? The answer to that question is yep. Do objectives always need to be measurable? The answer is that yeah, they do. They need to be measurable, but all objectives aren't easily quantified. Okay, and there's a difference between being measured and being quantifiable. Let's go back to our example of results and benefits. Results, outputs are usually always easily quantified. Number of organizations that are participating as partners in our project. Number of people served in our workshops. Number of workshops held. Those sorts of outputs are easily quantified, but changes in the community aren't as easily quantified in some cases, and that's particularly the case in things like language programs. we don't talk about the number of words that are memorized and that's an output, right? We don't talk about that as an important way of measuring an outcome, a beneficial change in the community. We talk about scales, language scales, changes in fluency, changes in usage. So scales, pre and post surveys, questionnaires, those are ways of doing some measurement of changes in the community that occur because of the project, which are outcomes, beneficial changes that occur because of the project, outcomes that are hard to quantify. Measure them using things like scales, surveys, pre-post questionnaires.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Okay. Well, I guess it's my turn, and we're going to move through these a little bit quicker. I'm hoping everybody can hear me. If you can't, please type in the chat box, and I will try to speak up even further. So the first question is, does the award ceiling include the non-federal share? And the answer is that yes, the award ceiling is always based only on the non-federal share being requested. Does the project have to serve only Native Americans? And as we typically serve everyone in our community. And the response is that no, they do not have to serve only Native American or Alaska Native or American Indians, but you would want to address that the organization's clientele are mainly Alaska Native American Indian, but they also serve all family members or community members, and ensuring that you are also, like Rondell was mentioning earlier, an eligible Native organization or tribe. Can IGAP funds be used for matching on an ERE project? The answer is yes. It is mentioned in the ANA ERE funding opportunity announcement on page 4. It speaks to, in accordance with section 803D3 of NAPA, it is allowed under the ERE program to utilize non-ANA federal funds to meet the cost-sharing match as long as neither legislation or regulation governing the allowable uses of such other non-ANA federal funds prohibits the use. Also, the EPA has confirmed this, but you do need to remember that they need to be allowable activities under the IGAP program with the natural overlap in the work that you are conducting for your project. Is the post-award required for every year of the project or just the grantee meeting, and what is the cost? The post-award is for year 1 only, and the grantee meeting costs are for each project or year or budget period. The post-award amount, as specified in the FOA, is $2,500, and the grantee meeting amounts vary by region. So for the eastern region, the amount is $4,000. For the western region, it's $4,500. For the Alaska region, it's $5,500. For Hawaii, $6,000. And for American Samoa, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, it's $8,500. In ERE, you can find this on page 21, in the SEDS FOA on page 24, preservation and maintenance language, page 23, also page 23 in Esther Martinez, and page 25 for SEDS. Is a line item budget and justification required for each year? Yes, they are both required for each project year, and you want to make sure that you are breaking out all of the costs in your justification for both the federal and non-federal share. As Rondell and Dan were mentioning, leverage does not go in your budget, but the non-federal, federal share and your total costs are here along with the breakouts in your budget justification. When filling out the 424A, do we use the total of all 3 years for our budget numbers? No, when you're filling out sections A through D of the 424A, you will only use the budget numbers for year 1. Section E is for those future funding periods, and they are using the totals, and so that's where you would enter the amounts for years 2 and 3 as applicable for your particular project. What are the start dates for the grants, and is this when we start our OWP activities? Yes, you want to match your start dates of your project to the start dates of the funding. For SEDS, SEDS, and ERE, we begin September 30th. And for the language, Esther Martinez, and preservation and maintenance, those begin October 1st to assist in coordinating with the school year that many of the projects fall into. Is the budget part of the 150-page limit? Yes, both the line item budget and budget justification are part of the 150 pages. However, they are exempt from the double spacing requirement. Each of those is allowed to be single-spaced. Do we need to include the MOUs or third-party agreements in the application? Yes, it is advisable to have all third-party agreements turned in with the application. However, they must be turned in no later than the time of award, unless if you are relying on match money from a third party, then a firm commitment of those resources, a letter or some other documentation, is required with the actual application. And you can find that in the end of the checklists in each of the funding opportunity announcements. And are there other technical issues that the applicants need to be aware of in how they fill out the forms and submit them? So we talked about the cutting and pasting, how and I will clarify for just a minute because there was a question about the cutting and pasting. Somebody said, well, it worked just fine. And the problem is not necessarily that it will not paste, but rather that your application can be rejected when you actually go to hit the submit button due to some software incompatibilities. So I also want you to be aware that you need to go to the Grants.gov website and check the versions of your browser, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome. Also, the versions of your operating systems, whether it's Windows XP, Windows 7, or Windows 8, and the different versions, and whether that is compatible with the application packet and downloading them. We are hearing about several issues of that this season. Also, if you're using a free PDF creator, there are known issues with the packet not accepting the PDF upload or rejecting the packet at time of submission. If you're using a full version of Adobe to create a PDF and attach it, you again want to check the compatibility, including if you're using the online PDF creator that Adobe has available sort of at that reduced rate or one-time monthly use. So you want to, again, it's just about really making sure that all of the versions that you're working with through your software are compatible with the actual Grants.gov packet, and they do tell you that in their help section. Okay, we are now going to move on to Napua from the Pacific region.
Thank you, Angela. All right, let's get to our first question. The SEDS FOA says that organizational development is a fundable area of interest. what qualifies as organizational development. Out here in the Pacific, we only have organizations. We don't have tribes. So this is a very attractive area of interest for the people here in the Pacific. And like Dan mentioned, you can have a project that focuses on organizational development, but again, that request for organizational development needs to come from your community. So if you are planning to implement a project under that area of interest, make sure that your community is asking for your organization to be further developed. Okay, next question. What is the format for the project summary abstract? And that format can be found in FOA under section 4.2 under the project description. And what you need to include in that is a clear, accurate, concise statement that includes a brief description of the proposed grant project, that includes the needs to be addressed, the proposed services, and the population or groups to be served. And then, of course, you also want to include your project title, applicant name, address, contact numbers, email address, and website address. And all of that is spelled out in the FOA under section 4.2, the project description. Again, this is the only part of your application that can be single-spaced and should be all-inclusive within a page. Also following the marginal guidelines that are given in the FOA. Can I submit my application by paper? Well, if you did not apply for a waiver by April 1st, then the answer would be no. But if you did get a waiver or apply for a waiver, when you are approved for that waiver, of course, those guidelines are also found in section 4.2 under request an exemption from required electronic application submission. So yeah, if you did not apply by April 1st, then the answer would be no to that question. Can you have more than one impact indicator? This year, yes, you can have more than one impact indicator. And of course, the guidelines for that are in section 4.2 under project description as well. What happens when my project generates income during the project period? Okay, there's a lot of times where your project will produce CDs, books, calendars, things that you can sell, or there may be instances where you're charging a fee for something that is produced through your project. Those pots of income need to be fed back into your project during the project period. Once your ANA project is over and complete, then that income can be used however your organization would like to use those. And how many people should my project benefit? This is sort of a case-by-case situation, but basically your project should include whatever amount of beneficiaries you feel your organization has the capacity to serve and to benefit. Also, it should align with the amount of money that you're asking for. and it should also depend on what what your community is asking for as far as the amount of people to benefit through your project. So again, go back to what their community is asking for and make sure that you're asking for the appropriate amount in your budget. But again, I said this is a case-by-case situation, so always contact your ANA TTA providers, and they can give you some clarification on your specific situation. When is it okay for me to contract out services required for project activities? Again, this is spelled out in Section 4.2 under project budget and budget justifications. Usually you want to contract out services that your organization does not provide. And if you're going to contract a chunk of your project out, you want to submit a separate budget for the ANA funds that will be going towards that contract. But again, that is spelled out in Section 4.2 in your FOAs under project budget and justification. And last question. Oh, okay, that was the last question. Thank you.
Nicola. Okay, so we've had several questions come up in the chat box, and I will just sort of let the TA providers answer some of these questions as I read them off, with a couple of exceptions because I have some notes about clarifications. So the first question: will it make a difference if you apply for level 1 or level 2 funding if the tribe is only 260 members for a SEDS governance grant? I'm also going to paste this into the chat box so that my colleagues can see it, and I'm going to let y'all respond.
This is Dan. The level 1, level 2 piece, I don't think really is the issue here. The issue is that the budget, whatever your budget is going to be driven by the work plan. And what you're going to convince folks of in your application is that the work plan that you have focuses on a project that is absolutely critical for your community to get the benefits from. That the project is going to reduce or eliminate a problem that's very, very important to your community, and reducing that problem is going to help the community reach a long-range goal that's important to the community. So rather than thinking about things in terms of level 1 and level 2 and size of the population to be served, think about the issue of making sure that the budget is reasonable and appropriate for project implementation, and that the project is really an essentially addresses some essential issues that are critical to your community.
Great, thank you, Dan. Okay, we have several questions regarding the OWP, filling them in. So I'm going to try to group these together. It says, don't we have to fill out the OWP in the PDF submittal form? If not, where would we upload the OWP in the Grants.gov packet? And a secondary question was also where to find the OWP. So I will put where to find the OWP in the chat box in a link, which Rich had put out earlier. I will note that the track changes are on that document, that you can turn them off, and then I will let my colleagues answer the whether then you have to fill out the OWP in the PDF, or where would you upload the OWP document?
Well, since the OWP thing was one of my questions, the PDF form that is part of your application package, you are going to have to fill out at least one form, because there are mandatory fields in that form. And my recommendation would be that you explain as you're typing into that form that your full OWP has been attached under mandatory documents. I would put your OWP under the program narrative attachment. So group that document, that Word document, with your program narrative and attach it under the program narrative section. But just to be clear, the FOA does not stipulate that it has to go under the program narrative section. That's just my recommendation. You could actually put it under other mandatory attachments as well.
Thank you, Rondell. A quick note, Anthony has put up the evaluation form. We will continue to answer questions for you. However, we would also like that you fill out the evaluation form in the event that you cannot stay with us any longer, as it is just shortly after noon. I only have a couple more questions on the board at this time. So the next question is around objectives. Actually, there's two questions. I think I'll separate them. So the first one is, if we change our 3 objectives every year in a 3-year project, will that count against the only 3 objectives rule?
That sort of relates. This is Dan. That sort of relates to one of the issues that I was discussing earlier, and whether or not objectives need to change on an annual basis. ANA says that you can have up to 3 objectives in your work plan, regardless of the project period. So if you have a 1-year project, 3 objectives is the maximum. If you have a 3-year project, 3 objectives is the maximum. You can have some. In the example that we talked about, you know, if you have an objective that deals with employing people, you can have a change in that objective, a change in the number of people to be employed in each year of a 3-year period. And that's only services, that still counts as only one objective, because the focus of the objective is employment. Or if the focus of an objective is an increase in fluency in year 1, in year 2, in year 3 of a program. That's one objective. So the area where I guess you're sort of focusing on perhaps is that if you have an objective, a set of objectives where there's clearly a change in the objective focus, then you can you can display those changed objectives in a variety of time frames. You don't have an objective doesn't necessarily take up an entire year. You can have an objective, one objective, planning curriculum, for instance, that would be a 6-month objective in the first year of a project. Implementation of teacher training could start in the first year and move into the second year of the project, and teacher presenting that curriculum to children to students, could be starting the second, moving to the third year of the project. So don't think about objectives as we've got to sort of stick with this. We're stuck with a series of static kinds of outcome statements. And that's not the case. We have some flexibility. You can build objectives sequentially with a variety of factors in that sequential development, or you can have a set of objectives that focus on the same sorts of outcomes that are displayed throughout the 3-year period. And if you've got more questions about that, for heaven's sake, give me a call or email me. We can get into more detail about it. It's kind of a complicated area to try and talk about over the phone in a short period of time.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Okay. So the question surrounds whether or not someone can write both a SEDS and SEDS project. My first response in the chat box was that they fall under the same CFDA, and I was interpreting it as being funded. And Ruth reminded me that you can write for both a SEDS and a SEDS. However, you would have to choose one should they both become fundable under ANA. So I hope that answers that question. The next question is a project abstract to be uploaded separately?
I will take a hit at that question. If you go to your application package, you have the option of, or there's a button called Project Narrative Form. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you include this, you include the project summary abstract with your narrative in this upload. And then, you create a PDF including your narrative and your abstract and upload it under that option.
Great. Thank you, Napua. Okay. If I have already cut and pasted into the OWP form in the Grants.gov packet, is it acceptable to print these forms and attach them instead of having to retype everything into the Word document?
I guess I'll try to take that one. To tell you the truth, I mean, you certainly can do that. There isn't a problem with doing that. I just don't, I can't tell you for certain if you do it that way whether your OWP is going to count within the page limit. That's the only thing I am not sure of. But you can certainly print them out and attach them. I'm just not sure whether they're going to be part of the 150-page limit. Back to you, Angela.
Okay. Thanks, Rondell. So at this time, I believe that we have answered all of the questions that came through during the presentation in the chat box. I just want to check one last time to see if there was a last question that someone wanted to answer or ask. And then I also wanted to remind you to connect with your regional TTA center for additional questions. Get your applications in for review, and I look forward to seeing everyone as a funded grantee next year. Putting out good thoughts for all of you. Okay, so there's one last question. Will Grants.gov generate an error if trying to upload a PDF package without OWP forms filled out? So the actual packet itself will create an error. However, you could get around that by at least typing in some of the information to satisfy the electronic piece of it, noting somewhere in there that you have actually attached it as a separate OWP approved form, so that neither ANA nor the reviewers would be confused about that, would be my suggestion. And then they want to know if there's going to be, yes, there will be a link, and the webinar will be available for you to re-listen to again. And Deb, I'm sorry, could you please retell me what your question was if I have missed it? I apologize. Oh, can an objective be something that you're not asking funding for?
Maybe I can help on that one a little bit. In the good old days, the Administration for Native Americans asked that you tie your objectives in the OWP to the budget and talk about which objective was being, what percentage of the budget did this objective, was the funding for this objective associated with. ANA doesn't do that anymore. So if you're presenting a work plan, and you show in your budget, let's just do this in a broad brush kind of way, and you show in your budget that your budget is going to support the work plan that you have described in your application, you don't have to tie each objective to a particular part of that budget. You don't have to do that. You just need to convince the reviewer, the folks that are paneling and reviewing the applications, that you've got a budget that will, in fact, take care of, effectively fund the work plan, the overall work plan that you've provided in your application. And I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, I have one last question that I missed. My apologies to Jasmine. What if the program within a school has a parent-teacher association with nonprofit status seeking the funding? Could that association be the applicant instead of the school district?
Well, again, that was one of mine. As long as they have the administrative capability and they can provide all of the necessary documentation for eligibility that's required in the FOA, as far as proving that you are a nonprofit and proving that your governing board is majority from the community to be served, then yes, you should be eligible.
Okay. I want to thank everyone for their participation today. Again, I'll have Anthony put that evaluation out just in case you want to fill that out for us. We really appreciate that. It helps us get better and better every time. But I wanted to make sure that everyone could find the other regional TTA centers so that if you have further questions, you can reach out to all of us in your specific regions, as we all know our own regions best. So at 3-star, you can reach the Alaska region website at www.anaalaska.org. For the Pacific region, www.anapacificbasin.org. For the Eastern region, www.anaeasternregion.org. And for the Western region, www.anawestern.org. Again, thank all of you for attending today, and the evaluation is in the chat box, the link for that. If there's any further questions, please reach out to us and we will have that link available. And then Anthony, maybe you could put that link back up for us all. And I wanted to thank each of the TTA members, all of my colleagues, for all of their work and assistance today in hosting this webinar and answering all of the questions. I really appreciate each one of you.
Thank you, Angela. Thanks, everybody. Good luck on your grants.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.